Today we're going to talk about why there's going to be a red wave in the United States. And to preface this, I think it's important to say going into the election, we don't know how it's going to go. And I think when I look at everything available to me, I feel like we're in a very good place to win the presidential election for Donald Trump. That being said, I don't know. You just don't know how things are going to play out. So it's important to make a distinction that I'm not necessarily just talking about what happens in the current election cycle. I'm talking about a phenomena that we see increasingly happening, I believe, in the 2024 election cycle, but in general, more broadly in society. We don't ever go in one direction 100% all the time forever. There is a point where the pendulum swings back in the direction it came from. It's just part of how nature works. Nothing carries momentum forever. It gains momentum. It carries onward by the force of gravity, and then when it gets to a certain point, it turns around and goes the other way. And what we see in the liberal activist mentality is this notion that because they are right, they will capitalize on infinite momentum. They will never lose steam. And we saw this happening when games were being invented and designed, probably around 2020 or maybe a little before that. All of the woke stuff happening, all of the corporate DEI initiatives, and companies just couldn't get enough of it. People were really believing that the woke stuff, the activist liberal stuff, is going to be a new trend that redefines the human race pretty much into perpetuity. But that's false. A lot of it was a fad. A lot of it was a temporary thing. It lasts for a while until people get tired of it, till they lose interest, and until they start to realize that it doesn't align with their values and with their personal interests. And that's where we're at right now. Now, the first thing I want to talk about here is the idea of whether it's okay to be in the middle, whether it's okay to be indifferent. And a good example of this would be if I go to church and I'm not a religious person, I appreciate Christianity, I appreciate the Bible. I've read the Bible several times in my life. I still read it from time to time, along with a lot of other religious texts and philosophies that I think are interesting and relevant to life. But I'm not a hardliner. I'm not a Christian fanatical. I'm not going to say that you have to believe in one particular thing 100% or even that you should. So I'm pragmatic about this. But I'm also supportive of the tenets of faith. I appreciate Christianity. It's meaningful to me. But if I go to church and I'm around Christians and then they start to say, well, you have to believe what we believe, and if you don't believe 100%, then you're going to go to hell. And then they start to be on this one-track mind, and the mission is to convert me. And it's not about whether we're going to just agree that we have different points of view. It's that everything is going to circle back around to how can they convert the outsider to their way of thinking. Even if it's something that seems like it's innocuous, like saying, okay, hey, do you want to go out for a hike? Let's go hike up the mountain today. And guess what? That Christian is going to be thinking, sure, I'm going to say yes, let's go on this hike up the mountain because maybe during this time we can have a deep conversation, and then I can convert this person and bring him over into the fold and save his soul. So you see, it's not really about going on the hike. It's about seeing if they can find a way to evangelize. And once I start to have that attitude, well, I see it, I sense it, then I'm done. Then we won't talk. We won't be friends. I won't go to your church. We're done. Now, that doesn't mean that I dislike that person. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the faith. It's just we don't have communion because that person cannot have a relationship that isn't built on manipulation. And that's what we see on the political left today. We see this attitude that you cannot choose to be in the middle. You cannot be indifferent. You cannot be a person who just says, you know what, I don't care who wins the election. I'm just going to chill out and play my favorite games and go to work and pay my bills and live my life. You know, it's not my fight. See, that kind of an attitude is not permitted anymore. And the reason I say it's not permitted is because increasingly there's examples where you're just living your life, you're just doing your thing, just normal stuff. And then somebody comes along and says, you know what, you have to do this particular thing, or you have to agree with this particular thing. And if you don't, you are part of the problem. You are an enemy, you are a bigot, you are ignorant, whatever it might be. And then suddenly you're thrust into this culture war and you realize that the battle has been brought to you. You're not allowed to sit on the sideline. Now, that's important because there's a lot of people who just don't really care too much. They probably would be moderates. Maybe they would vote. Maybe they just wouldn't bother to vote. But when they start to feel like they have to pick a side, because not picking a side is going to make you stigmatized or mistreated by some special interest group, then you say, okay, well, I guess if you're going to force me to pick a side, and I cannot be a moderate in the middle that's not necessarily invested in this battle, then I'm going to choose the side against you because you're the side that's coming to me, that's pushing things on me, that's saying I have to be opinionated, I have to have a position. Well, if you're going to force me to have a position, then I'm going to take a position against you until you get out of my face. That's the bottom line. Because you know what? The average guy doesn't care about abortion. Yeah, there's a few women who want abortions or the right to have abortions. That's an issue that's important to a few young liberal women, sure. But you know what? It's not a primary thing that most of us care about. It just isn't. The average guy wants to be left alone. The average guy wants to be able to pay the bills, maybe buy a house, maybe support a family, you know, maybe play a video game where you don't have to be gay and the character creator, maybe, you know, find a woman and support a family, maybe find a woman that identifies as a woman that doesn't want to kill her offspring. I don't know. Like, we all just have this stuff as men that we're interested in, like maybe not paying high gas prices, maybe not being sent off to go fight in a war that is funded by taxpayer dollars in a nation that's on the other side of the world. Like, maybe not dying in battle is something that most guys don't really, you know, I mean, most guys don't want to die in battle, probably. Yeah, if we're fighting to protect our neighbors in our homeland here, that's different. But if you're just talking about being constantly mired in conflicts on the other side of the globe, I think that that's a big deal, that we don't really want that. See, it's just basic stuff like not being forced to be woke, or not being forced to endure economic difficulties that are happening because of weak leadership, weak administration, and politicians who are more interested in driving special interest initiatives than in actually investing in economic fundamentals that will provide a pathway to prosperity for ourselves and future generations. These kinds of things. Ultimately, the position of the right, from the perspective of a middle-of-the-road guy, is a lot more based than the wild activist stuff that is happening on the left. And when you add in the fact that the left really does not have any tolerance for people not agreeing, then that kind of seals the deal for a lot of people if they actually decide, you know what, I'm going to vote. You know, things like, you know, things that matter to me, like let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about all that stuff going on where corporate employees were pushed to say, okay, you have to go get a COVID vaccine. Well, what if we didn't feel comfortable with it because we weren't 100% sure it's safe? Because that's where we were at just a few years ago, a couple years ago, on the fence, potentially being fired because we didn't want to get a vaccine. And you know what? It wasn't a political thing. It was just that there were a lot of rumors spreading around that possibly the vaccines were not tested well enough. They were not 100% safe. So those of us who were not in a risk category kind of started to think, well, you know what? Can't undo it. So I think I'm going to just sit on the sideline a little bit and not necessarily rush out there to get that vaccine, because kind of sounds like maybe there's some concerns. Maybe it's a good choice for people who are in a high risk category. But if I'm pretty young and healthy, you know, I'm going to just hang out. Not going to worry about it right now because I, you know, might be fine. I don't know. But I'd rather wait it out and, you know, not risk blood clots or heart problems or any kind of other things that might come along down the pike if there is something going on with this that, you know, I don't know. You know, and I think that's, you know, to segue off of that, there's this whole idea that people will say on the left, well, are you for the science or are you against the science? Well, or are you for the truth or against the truth? And the truth is that we generally do not know the facts. We make a decision based on who we trust. And sometimes we just don't know. I don't know if what I'm told on the news is the truth. I base my belief that it's true off of the track record, off of my observable facts. What I'm able to see is what I use to make a determination of whether I trust a source or not. But at the end of the day, I don't really know. If a medical professional tells you that something is safe, you don't necessarily know if it's safe or not. Now, if they have a good track record, then potentially you can trust them. But when the government says you have to trust us because we are a credible source, and if you do not trust us, then you are anti-truth or anti-science. Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm going to make my own decision based on whether I believe I can trust you. And that's where the left hates opposition. Because what they hate is someone daring to say that as a source, they are not necessarily unbiased, fair, and 100% trustworthy. And that's just like an abusive relationship. When somebody says, you have to do what I say, you have to let me have a controlling interest in your life. And if you say no, then that other person is going to immediately start lashing out with hate, smear campaigns, and doing everything they can to undermine you and make you fail. Because it's not about the issue, it's about the control. And, you know, I think while we're on that topic, it's very interesting to me how so many times we talk about men being aggressors, men being abusive or manipulative or controlling of women, because traditionally women are weaker than men, right? That's true. But it's also true that while men want to control women, oftentimes women thrive on manipulating men. That's just the bottom line. That is not all women, but many times that's how it works, because if women can't control with force, they will control with soft manipulation. And that's kind of how the left is. That's how the left operates too. It's always the saying that they are the victim, when in reality, they are trying to manipulate every situation. Just like you look at the news today, and you see so many news outlets that are covering what's going on in the elections, And it's super obvious. You don't even have to pick it apart to see that the news articles being published are simply 100% anti-Trump. And then you have a few outlets that are pro-Trump. But the point I'm getting at is it's not really unbiased. It's not neutral. It's not just reporting the news. It's always reporting and publishing things with a narrative twist, trying to force the reader to take a position that aligns with what they want. Recently, there was a thing going on about how, I believe the Washington Post was not allowed to endorse a candidate, and that created controversy because it was seen as a pro-Trump move, and it was not allowing articles that are endorsing Kamala Harris to be published in that news platform. Well, the reality is, since when is a news outlet supposed to be endorsing candidates? Aren't they supposed to publish the news and let people figure out who they endorse for themselves? So clearly, if you support the left, then that's okay. But if you don't support the left, then you are on the other side. You are with the enemy. And that's something that gets really old. Gets very old, especially when you throw in all of the mixed bag of DEI stuff and woke stuff, and finding that every time you turn the corner, it's more LGBTQIA plus stuff being jammed into every narrative, which doesn't reflect the average member of our community. It gets tiring when the niche is forced down people's throats, shoehorned into things which we otherwise would love, otherwise be interested in. And increasingly, people who are moderates, people who are in the middle, feel like they don't have a choice, and they have to take a position, because being able to just make up your own mind is considered to be controversial and partisan. So, going back to close out my thought on the COVID thing, like, just to, use that as a great example. The left made it such a political thing that then people start losing their jobs over it. It starts to become a thing where people are threatened, where there's people saying that if you don't want to get a COVID vaccine because you're not 100% sure it's safe, you shouldn't even be allowed to be part of society. And there were people saying that. For me, that really solidified my conviction. I am not going to support the left, because the left is very hateful, and they do not want anyone who disagrees with them to even be part of their community. They are not out to create an America for all people. They are out to create an America that aligns with their interests, falls in line, and allows itself to be subjected to that soft manipulation. I think for a lot of guys, we don't want that. That's just the bottom line. So then there's geography. Well, what happens when people get tired of living in cities which clearly hate a lot of the things which would be conducive to safety and living a harmonious life? Like Seattle. It used to be a pragmatic place that felt fun for everyone. Regardless of how you voted, we tended to disagree on strategy or method, but we agreed on the foundational premise that we wanted to have a stable, safe, economically successful society that was for everyone. But now, go take a walk through downtown Seattle. Compare it to what it was 5 years ago. All the retail stores are gone. There's heavy security presence in all the places which remain open. There's homelessness, drug use, and crime happening all day and all night, visibly on every street in the city. And I just know this because I went there. I went there for the first time after 5 years and saw it this past summer, and it was amazing to see the difference. After the summer of love and all the stuff going on, when protesters took over a police precinct, they never came back. Never, and the city never bounced back from that. Ultimately, businesses left the downtown retail core, and crime is just continuing to be a problem. And it's just not good anymore. It's not. It's all messed up. So I used to love being there. Now, no. I can't even justify going back. So what happens when people in cities start to say, okay, I guess I had enough of this. I'm tired of having the windows smashed out of my car and people crawling underneath it to see if they can steal parts to sell the copper, and wondering if I'm going to be mugged on the street, and not being able to go to the bathroom in a coffee shop because it's not even safe to have public restrooms anymore. Like those kinds of stuff. People being set fire to in the capital city of Olympia in the news every other week because there's lawlessness happening all over. You just never really know when you're going to be the random target of it. Well, people start to say, okay, I guess I will head out. I will go to a place that is a little less densely populated. I will go to a place that feels a little bit more moderate and safe, where I can go outside and not worry about what's going to happen to me. So they start to move from places like maybe inner city New York to a place like Pennsylvania, or they move from a place like Los Angeles and they go to a place like maybe somewhere in Nevada. So you start to see a geographic change as people move from places that are staunchly liberal and will continue to be staunchly liberal, and they go to places which are on the fence. They go to swing states. They go to places which actually will define election outcomes now and for years to come. So the Republicans are not going to win California. It's just not going to happen. Probably not going to win Washington or Oregon anytime soon. There's places that are liberal strongholds. They will continue to be. But the swing states are going to be increasingly on the table, increasingly easy to win for the right as that pendulum swings back toward the middle. The Democratic Party is going to be on a downhill trajectory until it gets over itself, starts to reflect the values and interests of the average person, and comes up with a premise that is more moderate. And that's not to say that the Democratic Party is bad. It's not to say that we should stay with one particular way of looking at politics forever. It's just anything, when it goes to an extreme and becomes wildly activist, well, it's not going to gain momentum forever, and there's going to be a correction, and people are going to wake up at some point and say, you know what, I've had enough of this. And the liberal politics that have been driving the Democratic Party really are not supportive of a lot of members of the community, like legal immigrants who come to the United States through the appropriate channels. They do not love seeing an immigration crisis where unvetted people pour across the border. Women who respect traditional values don't like to see the gender-neutral pro-abortion narrative jammed down their throats. Men don't appreciate the idea of propagating an entire generation of women who hate the idea of women even existing, where the new definition of what a woman is like a transgender man who has become a woman that is competing in some sort of women's sports. Like, that is not the general idea of what the average guy is attracted to. And if you want proof of this, then just look at how gamers are much more interested in Korean MMOs, which have sexy women in the character creator than they are in playing something like Dragon Age or Concord or something like that, right? Ultimately, we don't want to be necessarily extremely engaged with politics. But when you start forcing issues and it starts to feel like there's no place you can hide because you just get up in the morning, you make your coffee, you go to work, you try to just mind your own business and don't cause any trouble for anybody, and then people start to come after you in some way and force you to have an opinion in an evangelistic kind of a way, well, we are not looking to create a pseudo-religion that is going to propagate itself just like a legacy religion would, only without the values. We're not all anti-tradition. And nobody likes to feel manipulated. It's okay to include a lot of different ideas. That's great. That's pragmatic liberalism. But when you start to try to censor any idea that you don't think aligns with your version of the truth, well, at some point, enough is enough, and people are going to start moving away from places where they don't feel welcome to places where they do, and they're going to start finding their voice and voting to express that they too want their voices to be heard. So, if you haven't voted, make sure you do. But regardless of how the election turns out, I think what's clear is that no momentum carries on forever. And to all the people who think that they're just on the winning side because they're right and everyone else is wrong, your day is coming to an end. That's just the bottom line. Because you cannot act like a voice of the minority reflects the interests of the whole. And I think about how when you look at liberal people living in conservative communities, like here, I live in Montana, and we have plenty of liberal people living in the city, but our cities are small. And it's largely a conservative area. As a whole, the state is conservative. There's no problems. Yeah, sure. Trump supporters are going to probably roll their eyes at you if you are doing some kind of weird, rainbow stuff. But nobody's going to care. Not too much. But try flying a Trump flag in Seattle and see how that goes. I think you can really tell where the hate comes from when you start to realize that if you have conservative values, people will potentially attack you. They will potentially harm you. They will potentially destroy your property. And that's the difference. When one side will just disagree and the other side will actively try to do harm. That's another major reason for saying we are looking at some serious red flags coming from the left, and we do not need another 4 years of an abusive relationship with activists. Now, I think, finally, I'll close with this very interesting idea. So what happens if Trump wins? I 100% believe when you want to win, and you do not want what's best for the country, you want to win because that's just your end in itself. What happens if you lose? What happens if Trump wins and the Democrats do not? Well, I'll tell you what will happen is, yes, there will be unrest. There will be people who want to cause trouble as individual actors, sure. But there will also be the legacy politicians who identify with the left that will go out of their way to let the world burn. I remember I used to be a manager over one part of Walmart store. And in the store, we all had our different areas, so we'd move around. And I remember you know, there was this time when, you know, we went from one manager to a different manager, and the new guy was kind of, he was a nice guy, but he was not a good manager. He just didn't get it. And so there was this temptation to feel like, you know what? If things just fall apart, if things are just going really poorly, you know what? It kind of sticking it to this guy. Just let it fail, you know? Because this new guy is a joke. We'll just let the store burn. Like, there was that attitude, and then things started to circle downhill. And it wasn't just that he sucked, it was that we didn't really support him, and so we didn't really care if he failed, you know. And then by the same measure, I also have seen times when I would go from one area of responsibility to another. Somebody else, one of my peers, would take over my old area, and then I would kind of sit back on the sideline and I'd watch to see what happened. And it was always kind of tempting to want to say, oh, you know what? Oh, it's failing over there. Something bad is happening. You didn't meet some expectations. You didn't do a certain thing that needed to be done. Well, look, that's just that much more proof that I was able to do it. I had it together. This new person didn't, though. Right? So that's a temptation. It's a human temptation. So guess what? If we see a Republican win, then what's going to happen is the liberals are going to let disasters happen. They will stop trying to do what's in the best interest of the country. They will stop trying to prove that they care about America or the American people or the stock market or anything. So all holds are off. So if there's a fire that starts, they aren't going to try to put it out. They're going to just kind of let it burn and say, oh, look, I guess the world is reacting poorly to the new administration that got voted in. They're not going to try to do what's right for the country. They're not going to try to keep up the charade anymore. And that's going to be, if it happens, potentially a lot of adversity is going to come our way. So I do think it's important to be prepared for whatever may happen, because things could get crazy after the election. Things could get crazy in the stock market. Things could get crazy in our communities. And, you know, obviously it depends on where you live and things like that, how crazy we might be talking. But I do think it's important to be prepared. I think it's important for all of us to choose to use our voice to express ourselves, because if we don't use it, then, well, we could lose the largely free country that we have if we choose not to participate in the political process just because we feel like there's not any point. I think this is the time for people to put in the effort, put in the little bit of effort to make your voice heard and to be part of the political process if you aren't. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks for watching.